Rain-slicked streets reflected the flickering orange of a lone streetlight, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. He was there, curled into himself on the edge of the alley, his ribs pressing painfully against wet fur, eyes hollow and lost. Every shiver whispered of nights spent alone, the cold gnawing into his bones, the hunger carving deeper than any wound. I almost didn't see him at first, the dark swallowing the edges of his fragile frame. But then his gaze found me, a fragile spark of recognition in the abyss of despair. His breathing was shallow, uneven, a staccato rhythm that spoke of fear more than fatigue. I wanted to reach him, to promise him that the world could be different, that hands could be gentle, that warmth existed. But there was hesitation too, the kind that sinks deep, whispering that hope might be a cruel illusion. In that quiet, soaked moment, the rain became a witness to a silent plea, and I knew, whatever happened next, nothing would ever feel ordinary again. The alley smelled of rain-soaked concrete and rotting refuse, a combination that clung to his fur and filled his nostrils with the bitter tang of the world he had been cast into. Each raindrop that struck the asphalt hissed softly, a soundtrack to the quiet torment he endured. He pressed himself closer to the brick wall, hoping the rough surface would somehow shield him from the weight pressing on his chest. Weight not of the rain, but of memory, of all the hands that had once promised care and left only scars. His eyes darted at the smallest movements, a rat scuttling across a puddle, the flicker of a shadow behind a dumpster, a passerby kicking a bottle without seeing him. The tension in his muscles was constant, coiled like springs ready to snap, because the world had taught him that a single misstep could mean pain. Hunger gnawed at his insides, sharp as the shards of glass littering the alley. Yet he had long ago learned to endure it, to let it dull into background noise, as permanent and familiar as the ache in his bones. At one point, he raised his head slightly, ears twitching at the faint sound of footsteps in the distance. He froze completely, a statue of fear, and the rain ran down the curve of his spine like liquid metal. The footsteps approached, then receded. Relief was brief, fragile, like sunlight through storm clouds, gone before he could savor it. Time passed in distorted fragments. One moment he counted seconds, the next he counted heartbeats. Loneliness was not just the absence of touch, it was the absence of expectation. The knowledge that no one would call his name, that no one would notice if he vanished entirely. He closed his eyes briefly and shivered, not from cold alone, but from the heavy weight of despair pressing him into himself. And yet, in that infinite grey stretch between moments, there was a flicker, a faint glimmer of instinct, a small rebellious spark that whispered survival. He twitched his ears toward it, uncertain, but unwilling to abandon it entirely. Somewhere beneath the layers of fear and hunger, beneath the betrayal and neglect, a tiny ember of awareness persisted. Perhaps not all hands would hurt, perhaps not all voices would shout. That ember burned just long enough for me to see him. From the shadows, I glimpsed the ribs pressing under fur, the damp matted hair, the wide, wary eyes that seemed too old for his body. A sudden surge of protectiveness hit me, a visceral raw ache that I could not ignore. His gaze met mine for a fleeting instant, hesitant yet imploring, and something inside me shifted. For the first time in hours, perhaps days, he did not flee. He lowered his head slightly, not in submission, but in observation, measuring whether I was another predator or a rare anomaly in his world of constant threat. My breath caught in my chest as I slowly extended a hand, letting the rain soak my sleeve, letting the tremor in my voice carry only reassurance. The alley seemed to hold its breath along with him. He did not move immediately. Minutes stretched into eternities, punctuated only by the rhythmic drumming of rain and the faint echo of distant traffic. Then, just as hesitation threatened to reclaim him, he shifted slightly, leaning his nose toward my hand, sniffing cautiously. Each inhalation was a negotiation, a silent question: can this be trusted? I held still, letting him decide, and he made his choice, not boldly but delicately, as if even a single misstep could undo him. That moment, fragile as it was, marked the first fracture in the wall of shadows that had enclosed him. The alley remained harsh and indifferent, the rain unrelenting, but the faint spark of connection, almost imperceptible yet undeniable, had been struck. It was enough to begin a journey neither of us knew would be easy, but one that promised a chance at something neither of us could yet name hope. The first rays of dawn crept into the alley, scattering droplets of rain like tiny prisms across the asphalt. He lifted his head just enough to catch the light, eyes narrowing against the sudden glare. The night had been long and unrelenting, yet in the soft warmth of morning, something shifted inside him. There was curiosity now, mingled with instinctive caution, a tension that made every muscle taut, ready to flee, yet just slightly willing to linger. I knelt slowly, letting my shadow stretch across the puddles, careful not to startle him. My hand hovered in the space between us, not pressing, not demanding, only offering a presence. For a moment, it seemed the world had frozen, the hum of the city outside the alley fading into silence. He sniffed the air cautiously, ears twitching at each faint sound, the distant roar of a car, a bird's cry from above, the subtle dripping of water from a loose pipe. Every sensation was a test, every movement a potential threat, yet he did not retreat. Minutes passed like hours, each moment a silent conversation of trust. I spoke softly, almost to myself, letting my words float in the air, carrying no commands, only gentle reassurance. The scent of damp earth and rain clung to us both, a shared cloak in that tiny, fragile world. Slowly, he inched forward, nose dipping toward the hand I had extended. There was no leap, no sudden gesture, only a careful, deliberate motion, as if testing the very air between us. The first touch came almost imperceptibly. His whiskers brushed my fingers, a feather-light acknowledgement of presence, a fragile bridge across the chasm of fear. My chest tightened, awareness sharpening with every heartbeat. This small contact carried the weight of countless lost nights, of hunger, cold, and betrayal, but also the potential for something new, something transformative. As I stayed beside him, the alley itself seemed less hostile. The walls, once cold and menacing, were softened by the pale morning light. Puddles reflected gold and blue, painting a small, surreal world that felt temporary, sacred even. Each drop of rain that lingered on the edges of the bricks seemed to celebrate this fragile truce. He lowered his head closer, almost brushing my hand fully now, and I could see it, the faint glimmer of recognition, of possibility, shimmering in his eyes. We did not speak, not in words that mattered. Instead, we communicated through stillness and patience, through the subtle cadence of breaths and heartbeat. Each inch he moved toward me was a victory, each hesitant glance a testament to resilience. Around us, the city began to stir, footsteps echoing, engines humming, a dog barking in the distance. But inside the alley, time was suspended, measured only by the quiet negotiation of trust. Hours passed. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the wet concrete and turning puddles into mirrors. He stepped closer, ears rising slightly, tail brushing the ground. Not yet wagging, but no longer entirely hidden. I mirrored his pace, careful not to crowd, careful to let him define the rhythm of our interaction. In that small, unremarkable alley, an extraordinary transformation began there, the fragile birth of hope, the first threads of connection. By midday, he allowed me to touch him fully, brushing his damp fur with gentle fingers, feeling the heat of life pulsing beneath the thin coat. He flinched once, then hesitated, then leaned into the touch, as if discovering for the first time that not all hands caused pain. It was a slow revelation, each movement weighted with the history of neglect, each acceptance a small defiance of fear. The world outside the alley, harsh, loud, indifferent, was momentarily irrelevant. In that pocket of sunlight and damp concrete, trust was being forged in silence, patience acting as mortar. He began to walk beside me, tentative steps that spoke of tentative belief in a new reality, a reality where warmth, food, and safety were not punishments but gifts. Each step carried him further from shadows, each glance forward a small, fragile promise to himself that life could still hold goodness. By the time I finally stood, stretching my legs from hours of kneeling, he trotted a few paces ahead, pausing to look back, eyes glinting with cautious optimism. The world was still a place of unknowns, but for the first time, it also held possibilities. And in that moment, as sunlight warmed his damp fur and I offered a quiet, patient smile, I realized that rescue was not a single act. It was a dialogue, a negotiation, a commitment made in moments invisible to anyone else. He was still wary, still fragile, but no longer alone. The first chapter of healing had begun, not with grand gestures, but with quiet understanding, gentle patience, and the delicate courage of a creature daring to hope again. The first few days at home were a revelation, though not a gentle one. Every corner of the apartment smelled new: warm wood, faint perfume, the lingering scent of meals prepared in safety rather than desperation. He padded softly across the floor, paws slipping on tiles that felt strange beneath them, ears flicking at the hum of appliances and the occasional creak of the building settling. The world was alive in ways he had forgotten. Sunlight filtering through blinds, the distant laughter of children outside, the whisper of wind through a half-open window. Each sound, each texture was a test of courage, a reminder that this was not the alley, not the rain-soaked streets, not the hunger or neglect. He learned quickly to recognize routine. The soft jingle of keys in my pocket, the low hum of the refrigerator, the gentle voice calling his name. Meals came not as scraps but as offerings, placed carefully, with warmth in intention if not just in temperature. At first, he ate cautiously, sniffing every bite as if it might vanish or turn to poison. Then, gradually, hesitation gave way to acceptance. Each swallowed morsel was a victory, each lap of water a quiet affirmation that sustenance need not be feared. Trust, however, was far slower. Shadows still held menace, sudden movements made him freeze, and loud noises sent him skittering to corners, trembling like a leaf in the wind. But patience, extended without condition, became a new language. I did not reach immediately when he flinched. I waited, letting him recalibrate, letting him decide when touch was safe. And when he did approach, slow and tentative, eyes wide with vulnerability, I offered reassurance not in force, but in presence. A hand hovering near, a soft word, a pause. These were our milestones, each more significant than any grand act of heroism. Sunlight became a teacher. He would stretch his body across warm patches of floor, letting the heat sink into sore muscles, letting it remind him that warmth could be gentle and consistent, not fleeting and dangerous. The sound of laughter outside, once a distant, mocking echo, became a melody that coaxed him from hiding. Every interaction, every tentative approach to play or exploration was a lesson. The world could be safe, the world could be good if approached slowly, patiently, and with courage. Yet setbacks arrived with brutal insistence. A door slammed too loudly, startling him into retreat. A stranger passing by the window triggered a full-body freeze, trembling from head to tail. Nights brought nightmares, shadows stretching like monsters across walls, and he would whimper quietly, eyes darting at shapes unseen. Healing was not linear. Each step forward seemed to carry the weight of the past, threatening to undo progress in a heartbeat. And still, small victories accumulated, almost imperceptibly. A wag of the tail at a familiar voice, a hesitant nudge against my leg, a head resting lightly against my hand without flinching. Each act, however minor it seemed to an outsider, was a declaration: I am here, and I am beginning to believe that I belong. The apartment transformed alongside him, once stark and foreign, now alive with the rhythms of shared life. Blankets became nests of comfort, toys became instruments of joy, and sunlight was a daily reminder that danger was not constant. I watched him grow in the quiet moments, staring out the window as birds flitted across the sky, paws resting lightly on the sill, nose twitching at scents carried on the wind. He explored corners once avoided, sniffed at furniture, circled spaces without hesitation. Each day, he stretched farther, slept more deeply, and greeted me with a look that was not purely cautious, but expectant, even hopeful. Healing was as much internal as it was physical. He learned the cadence of breathing that meant calm, the gestures that meant safety, the gestures that meant play. Every sound, every touch, every interaction was a lesson written in fur and muscle memory. I, too, learned how to read the smallest twitches, how to respond to silent pleas, how to offer presence without pressure. Our growth intertwined, a mutual exchange of patience and understanding. By the end of the week, he no longer flinched when I reached for him. He no longer froze at the shadow of a passerby. He wagged his tail at my voice, though hesitantly at first, then with increasing enthusiasm. The apartment had become a landscape of security, sunlight illuminating both corners and corners of his heart, once shaded by fear. Healing was slow, deliberate, and often painful, but it was undeniable. In quiet moments, as he rested his head on my lap, eyes half closed, I could feel the lingering tension leave his body, replaced by a fragile sense of belonging. The weight of the past still pressed faintly, but not with the crushing force it once had. He had begun to understand that not every hand hurts, not every voice shouts, and not every shadow conceals threat. And in that understanding he began to walk taller, chest rising with a cautious confidence, tail lifted ever so slightly. The lessons in healing were far from complete, but the foundation had been laid: patience, presence, consistency, and love. Each day he learned not just to survive, but to hope, to trust, to live in a world that had once seemed utterly hostile. The afternoon air hung heavy with the scent of rain and earth, clouds dark and brooding over the horizon. He padded beside me along the quiet street, ears alert, muscles coiled, every step a negotiation between instinct and trust. The apartment had been safe, but the world outside still bore teeth, and he remembered. His eyes flicked at shadows, scanning for threats, his tail held low in a cautious arch. I could feel the tension ripple through him with each sound. The distant roar of a car engine, the abrupt clap of a metal gate swinging in the wind. We rounded a corner, and the unexpected happened. A sudden crash. An overturned trash can, bottles shattering into glittering shards across the wet asphalt, sent him skidding backward, bristling, eyes wide in panic. He froze, body trembling, a low whine escaping his throat. His instincts screamed at him to flee, yet the leash and my calm presence created a fragile tether between fear and reason. I knelt quickly, speaking softly, letting my voice weave a thread of safety through the chaos. At first, he refused to move, ears flattened, tail tucked tightly against his belly. Every muscle in his body screamed terror, every breath shallow and ragged. Then, slowly, I coaxed him forward, one step, then another, until we stood facing the wreckage together. It was not the alley of old nightmares, not the streets of hunger and neglect. It was chaos controlled, danger observed, a moment of trial. And in that crucible, courage emerged, not the absence of fear, but its careful mastery. A small figure approached from the shadows. A frightened kitten stranded atop the overturned trash can. The dog's ears flicked, eyes narrowing as recognition dawned. Instincts warred with lessons learned: flee or protect, fear or loyalty. His body quivered, but he stepped forward cautiously, sniffing the littered ground, inching toward the trembling creature. I followed close behind, hands ready to intervene but withholding unless necessary. He paused, assessing, then lowered his body slightly, tail wagging tentatively, a silent promise that he would not harm. The kitten shivered, claws digging into the metal edge, eyes wide with terror. A soft, almost imperceptible nudge from the dog encouraged it downward, guiding it toward safety. I held my breath. The world seemed suspended. The wind still, the distant hum of traffic fading to silence. In that moment, his bravery was raw, uncalculated, pure, an instinct honed by survival and tempered by trust. The danger was not over. A second gust of wind sent a plastic bag tumbling across the street, startling both of us. He flinched, ears back, but did not retreat. I mirrored his movements, careful, steady, offering reassurance with voice and presence. Step by step, we navigated the debris, guided the kitten safely to the sidewalk, and finally stood together. Dog, human and small creature bound by courage and trust forged under duress. The intensity of the moment left him trembling even after the danger had passed. I knelt beside him, hand resting lightly on his damp fur, feeling the tension slowly release. His eyes met mine, wide and glistening, and I saw it: pride, relief, and a flicker of exhilaration. The alley, the apartment, the streets, they had been teachers, but this was the test that proved not just survival, but character, resilience, and courage. As we walked back toward home, the clouds began to break, sunlight spilling in golden shafts across wet asphalt. He paused, sniffing the air, tail rising slightly with cautious confidence. Each step felt different now, imbued with the knowledge that fear could be confronted, danger could be navigated, and that trust, both in me and in himself, was a tool, not a weakness. Back in the apartment, he circled a favorite blanket, settling into a tight coil, ears twitching but relaxed, muscles loose. He had faced chaos and emerged intact, shaped not just by fear but by choices made in trust and guidance. I knelt beside him, brushing damp fur from his back, and felt the deep connection that had grown between us, an unspoken acknowledgement of the trials faced and survived together. That evening, as shadows lengthened across the room, he rested his head lightly against my leg, eyes half closed, and a low, contented sigh escaped his chest. The crucible had tested him, and he had passed. Not because the world had been gentle, but because he had learned to navigate its storms, to trust cautiously, and to embrace courage even when fear was loudest. He had transformed in those hours, a creature once on the brink now tempered by challenge. The lessons of patience, trust, and love had crystallized into action. Courage, he had learned, was not the absence of fear, but the quiet, steady decision to face it. And in that quiet room, with evening light pooling around us, I knew the final chapter, one of triumph, reflection, and peace, was approaching. The morning sun spilled into the apartment like liquid gold, drifting across the floor and warming the soft contours of his fur. He stretched, limbs extended, spine arched, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he seemed unburdened, not alert, not defensive, but fully present. The apartment, once a foreign landscape of unknown sounds and strange scents, now felt like home. Every corner held familiarity, every shadow had been measured and accepted. Even the quiet hum of appliances was no longer alarming but comforting, a gentle heartbeat accompanying our shared existence. Outside, the city breathed around us. Distant chatter, the rhythmic hum of traffic, the faint barking of dogs in the distance. Each sound was no longer a threat, but a testament to life continuing, to movement and possibility. He padded to the window, nose pressed against the cool glass, tail lifting slightly, eyes bright and attentive. Birds flitted across the courtyard, leaves swaying in the breeze, sunlight dancing on wet asphalt. He watched them with the quiet fascination of one who has known deprivation, who has learned to notice beauty where once there was only survival. I watched him, hand resting lightly on his back, and felt a swell of emotion. Pride, relief, and awe. He had emerged from shadows into light, from fear into trust, from despair into joy. His ribs, once sharp beneath matted fur, were now softened by nourishment and care. His eyes, once hollow and wary, now sparkled with curiosity and quiet confidence. Every twitch of his ears, every subtle tilt of his head, spoke volumes of lessons learned and fears overcome. We ventured outside that day into a park drenched with sunlight, the grass soft beneath his paws. He moved slowly at first, testing the vast openness, sniffing the air, ears twitching at every distant sound. Then, as if realizing the world could be generous rather than hostile, he picked up pace, tail wagging tentatively at first. Then, with unrestrained delight, he bounded toward a fluttering leaf, then skidded, laughing in his own way, across the damp grass. Each step, each leap was a celebration of survival, of resilience, of the trust that had been painstakingly earned. Children passed by, smiling, throwing balls, calling greetings. He approached cautiously at first, body low, eyes wide, tail flicking. And then, after a pause, the tiniest nudge of recognition, a tail wag in return, a tentative sniff, the first small bridge of connection to the wider world beyond safety. It was a quiet triumph, unnoticed by most, but monumental in its emotional resonance. Later, as we rested under the shade of a tall oak, he leaned into me, resting his head on my lap, eyes half closed, breathing deep and steady. The city hummed around us, a world full of unpredictability and chaos, but he lay calm, grounded, and secure. I brushed a strand of damp fur from his eyes, feeling the warmth of his body, the steady rhythm of life that had almost been extinguished. He had learned to trust again, to hope again, to live fully despite scars both seen and unseen. Evening descended like a gentle curtain, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. The park emptied slowly, shadows lengthening, light softening. He sat beside me, tail curling around his paws, eyes following the final birds overhead. I realized then that his journey had transformed us both. He had found courage, and I had witnessed it in its most intimate and powerful form. The alley, the rain, the hunger, and fear, they had shaped him, yes, but they had not defined him. Love, patience, and persistence had forged a new path. As darkness fell, we returned home. The apartment, once stark and unfamiliar, now radiated comfort. Blankets, toys, and soft sunlight filtering through the blinds created a sanctuary that had been painstakingly earned. He curled up at the foot of the bed, nose tucked under a paw, tail flicking lazily. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, a quiet testament to survival, trust, and connection. In that final stillness, I felt the poetry of transformation settle between us. Shadows had been confronted, fear had been mastered, trust had been earned, and courage had emerged from trial. He had walked a journey from despair to hope, from isolation to connection, from the end of his rope to the gentle embrace of life. And as I watched him sleep, warm and safe, I realized that the story was not just about survival. It was about renewal, the profound resilience of spirit, and the quiet miracles born of patience, empathy, and love. Outside, the city carried on, indifferent and alive, yet in that apartment, in that shared heartbeat, there was a world renewed, a life reclaimed, and a story of light emerging at the very edge of darkness. And in that light, we both knew, even at the brink, transformation was possible, and love could guide the lost back to themselves. The morning air was crisp, tinged with the scent of earth and blooming flowers, a stark contrast to the damp, metallic smell of the alley he once called home. He padded across the sunlit yard, tail high, for glinting gold in the early light. Each step carried a confidence that had once been inconceivable, the careful hesitation of survival replaced by the ease of belonging. Birds chirped from the branches above, their melodies no longer alarming but inviting, and he lifted his nose to catch the fragrance of freshly cut grass and soil, inhaling deeply as if tasting the sweetness of life itself. The neighborhood was awakening, children laughing as they chased balls across lawns, neighbors calling greetings from porches. He approached slowly at first, ears tilted, tail wagging tentatively, scanning for danger. Then, after a pause, the softest nod of recognition, the world was not just safe, it was filled with possibilities. A group of dogs trotted toward him from a nearby yard, tails high, excitement in every step. At first, he froze, memory of past threats flaring like lightning, heart hammering against ribs that had once known only fear. I knelt beside him, whispering softly, letting him feel the anchor of presence beneath his paw, the tether of trust that had been painstakingly forged over months of patience. Slowly, carefully, he stepped forward, meeting the others with tentative sniffs, cautious tail wags, subtle postures of peace. Each interaction was a small victory, a new lesson in courage, communication and trust, not just with humans, but with the world itself. Laughter bubbled from the children nearby as he bounded alongside the other dogs, paws skimming dew-laden grass, body loose with delight. By midday, he had discovered a favorite patch beneath a large oak tree, sunlight filtering through the branches to warm his fur. He rolled onto his back, paws in the air, eyes closed, a soft rumble of contentment vibrating from his chest. I watched him, heart swelling with quiet pride, understanding that he had crossed the threshold from survival to thriving, from fear to joy. The scars remained, faint but present, like distant shadows reminding him of the journey, yet they no longer dictated his actions. The day unfolded in small, exquisite moments, sniffing at the petals of a flower, playfully chasing a leaf carried by the wind, pausing to watch a butterfly land delicately on a bush. Each moment was a celebration of existence, of a life reclaimed, of trust realized. The world, once an adversary, had become a canvas for exploration, curiosity, and delight. He returned often to my side, nudging me gently, sharing each discovery silently, eyes alight with the unspoken promise of connection. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold, he rested his head against my lap under the oak, the warm breeze ruffling his fur. Shadows lengthened, but they no longer held menace. They were soft, comforting, a testament to the journey completed. Around us, life continued, distant voices, rustling leaves, the gentle hum of a city that moved without pause. Yet in that moment, time seemed to stretch, encapsulating the culmination of struggle, trust, and renewal. Evening settled like a velvet curtain, stars peeking through the twilight, and he lay curled beside me, chest rising and falling in rhythmic, untroubled breaths. His eyes half closed, glistening faintly in the last rays of sunlight, reflected not just the story of survival, but the narrative of transformation, resilience tempered by love, courage forged through trials, and hope that had bloomed where despair once thrived. In the quiet hush of night, I traced a finger along his back, feeling the strength beneath the softness, the life that had fought its way through fear, neglect, and uncertainty. He shifted slightly, pressing closer, and I understood that this was more than recovery. It was a life fully embraced, a spirit renewed, a soul that had discovered its place in a world that had once seemed hostile, but now radiated with infinite possibilities. And as the stars above blinked gently, indifferent yet eternal, I whispered a silent promise: no matter what storms may come, he had found his horizon, and together we would explore every sunrise, every shadow, every breath of wind, fully alive, fully trusted, and wholly free. He lay curled in the soft glow of evening, the world outside continuing its endless hum. Yet within this small space, time seemed to hold its breath. Shadows no longer threatened him, fear no longer ruled him. Every scar, every shiver, every trembling step had led to this: a life not merely survived, but fully embraced. His chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, tail flicking softly, ears relaxed, eyes half closed yet sparkling with quiet wonder. I rested my hand on his back, feeling the warmth and strength beneath the fur, the pulse of a spirit reborn. The city beyond the windows was vast and unpredictable, but he had learned to navigate it with courage, trust, and grace. And in that knowledge, in the slow exhale of peace, there was something larger than survival, a proof that even at the edge of despair, life could bloom again, whole and radiant. The night settled around us, stars blinking softly above, as if witnessing the quiet miracle of a soul restored. And in that stillness, I realized the truth I had been carrying all along: love is not just a comfort, it is a light, a force strong enough to guide even the most lost heart back to itself. He lifted his head briefly, eyes meeting mine, and in that gaze was an unspoken promise: we had both been transformed, and together we would face every sunrise, every shadow, every breath of wind, fully alive, fully trusted, and wholly free. And as the first light of dawn hinted on the horizon, the world felt infinite, gentle, and filled with possibility.